It was a bright sunny afternoon in a quiet neighborhood where children played in their yards and the sound of lawnmowers filled the air. Marcus Hill, a calm and kind man in his 40s, was driving home with his wife Danielle and their teenage son Caleb. They had just returned from a small picnic at the park. The car was filled with the smell of grilled food and the laughter of his family. Marcus had promised his son ice cream on the way home, and they were still smiling about it. When they turned into their street, Marcus parked his car in front of their modest but neat house. He stepped out, carrying a picnic basket while Danielle held a folded blanket. Caleb ran ahead to open the gate. The afternoon felt peaceful, and for Marcus, it was one of those simple, happy moments in life he wanted to remember. But that calm moment ended when the sound of police sirens echoed down the street. 2 patrol cars stopped right in front of their driveway. At first, Marcus thought there must have been an accident nearby. But when the officers got out and walked straight toward him with serious faces, he realized something was wrong. One officer asked loudly, "Sir, can we see your hands?" Marcus was confused but raised his hands slowly, trying to stay calm. "Officer, is there a problem?" he asked politely. The officer didn't answer right away. He looked Marcus up and down and said, "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for." Marcus blinked, surprised. "A suspect? I just came back from the park with my family." Danielle stepped closer, holding their picnic blanket tightly. "He hasn't done anything wrong," she said softly. But one of the officers told her to step back. Caleb froze, holding his mother's hand, his eyes wide with fear. Marcus tried to explain. He even offered to show his ID, but the officers weren't listening. Neighbors began to peek through their windows. One man across the street pulled out his phone and started recording. The street fell silent except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Officers, you're making a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." But they didn't stop. One of the officers roughly took Marcus's arm to handcuff him. Danielle cried out, "Please stop. That's my husband." Caleb began to cry, trying to run toward his father, but another officer stopped him. Marcus didn't fight back. He knew that staying calm was the only thing he could do. "It's okay, son," he said in a soft voice as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "It's okay." The sight broke Danielle's heart. She watched as the man she loved was forced into the police car while the neighbors whispered and filmed. Marcus turned his head slightly and gave her a small, reassuring smile from the window. It was the kind of smile that said, "Trust me, I'll be okay." When the car drove away, Danielle held Caleb tightly. She didn't know what to do next, but she couldn't just stand there. She grabbed her phone, called a friend, and then headed straight to the police station. Caleb sat in the back seat, tears running down his cheeks. "Mom, they think Dad's a criminal," he said in a trembling voice. Danielle tried to stay strong for him. "No, baby. They made a mistake. Your dad is a good man, and soon everyone will know it." At the police station, Marcus was quietly sitting on a metal chair in a small room. His hands were still cuffed, and his heart felt heavy. He had spent years teaching his son to always be polite and respectful, but now he was being treated like he was dangerous. He thought about Danielle and Caleb and hoped they weren't too scared. When an officer came in, Marcus asked if he could call his wife, but the officer ignored him and walked out. Marcus sighed and lowered his head. He wasn't angry, just deeply disappointed. He had always believed in justice, fairness, and the goodness of people. But now, he was sitting in a cell because of the color of his skin and a false assumption. Meanwhile, Danielle arrived at the front desk of the station, out of breath and holding her phone with pictures from their picnic. "My husband is here," she said firmly. "You made a mistake. He was at the park with us all day. Look." She showed photos of Marcus flipping burgers, laughing with Caleb, and sitting under a tree. The officer at the desk looked uncertain, but said she would have to wait. Hours passed slowly. Marcus sat in silence, his thoughts racing. He had worked his entire life to build a reputation based on honesty and respect. He had served his country in various roles, always believing that doing right would bring right. But today, all of that seemed invisible. Finally, one young officer walked into the records room to process Marcus's details. He typed Marcus's name into the system, expecting a routine check. But the screen flashed red with a high security alert. The officer frowned and leaned closer. On the screen, it read, Marcus Hill, Deputy Director, Department of Justice, Federal Division. The officer's hands froze on the keyboard. His face turned pale. He quickly called the chief. Within seconds, the station was filled with quiet panic. The same officers who had brought Marcus in were now whispering nervously among themselves. The chief of police hurried in, looked at the record, and realized the seriousness of their mistake. Marcus was sitting quietly when the cell door opened. The chief entered, his voice trembling. Mr. Hill, I am so sorry. Please, sir, let us explain. But Marcus didn't move. He simply looked at him with calm eyes. You already explained, he said softly in the lobby. Danielle stood up when she saw movement inside. She grabbed Caleb's hand tightly. She didn't know what was happening yet, but something felt different. One of the officers came out, looking nervous. Ma'am, please come with me, he said quietly. Danielle followed, her heart pounding. When she entered the hallway, she saw Marcus standing there, free from the cuffs, still quiet but holding his composure. She ran to him and hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Caleb rushed to his father too, holding onto his coat. Marcus bent down and hugged them both. It's okay, he whispered. It's all going to be okay. The officers stood at a distance, watching the family reunion in silence. None of them spoke. They knew what they had done could not be undone. Marcus turned his head slightly and gave the chief a long look, not of anger, but of quiet disappointment. That evening, as they drove home, the neighborhood that once felt peaceful now seemed different. The same people who had filmed the arrest were watching again from behind curtains. Danielle sat in silence, holding Marcus's hand. Caleb leaned against the window, lost in thought. Marcus looked at his son through the rearview mirror and said softly, Sometimes people see what they expect, not what's real. But you must never let that change who you are. Caleb nodded, trying to understand. When they reached home, the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The picnic basket was still lying on the front porch where they had dropped it earlier. Marcus picked it up slowly. He didn't say a word, but his heart was heavy. He knew tomorrow would bring questions, reports, and headlines, but for now, all he wanted was to sit with his family and remind them that even after the worst moments, hope still had a place, and somewhere across town. In the police station that had humiliated him, the officers were still whispering about what had happened. They now knew exactly who Marcus Hill was, but they were yet to understand the lesson his silence had already taught them. The next morning, sunlight filled the Hill family's living room, but the warmth didn't reach anyone's heart. Danielle was quiet, staring at the breakfast table. Caleb kept pushing his cereal with a spoon, his eyes still red from crying. Marcus sat by the window, sipping coffee slowly. The night before had changed everything. He had spent hours thinking about what happened, not just as a man, but as someone who had spent his life believing in fairness and justice. The phone rang. Danielle jumped slightly before answering. It was the police chief, asking to meet Marcus as soon as possible. Marcus agreed, but said calmly, I'll come when my family's ready. He didn't want to rush. He wanted Caleb to see that they were not victims. They were strong, even after the humiliation. When they reached the police station later that morning, everyone went silent as Marcus walked in. Officers stood up from their desks, pretending to be busy. The chief came forward immediately, nervous and respectful. "Mr. Hill, we are truly sorry for what happened yesterday," he said, his voice shaking. "It was a misunderstanding." Marcus looked at him quietly. "A misunderstanding can be fixed," he said softly. "But the way you treated my family can't be forgotten." The room went still. Danielle stood beside him, her hands clasped. Caleb looked around, seeing the same officers who had shouted at them the day before, now standing like guilty schoolboys. The chief tried to explain that the report of a robbery suspect had been mistaken, that they were just doing their job. Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand doing your job," he said. "But what I saw was not a job, it was judgment." His words carried no anger, only truth. Then Marcus opened a small folder he had brought with him. Inside were several documents, stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. "For the record," he said calmly, "I am Deputy Director Marcus Hill, assigned to the Federal Task Force on Civil Rights and Police Conduct. What happened here will not be ignored, but it will also not be handled with revenge." The chief's face lost color. Around the room, several officers shifted uncomfortably. Marcus continued, "I'm not here to ruin anyone's career. I'm here to remind you why this uniform matters. When people see you, they should feel safe, not scared." Daniel squeezed his hand gently. Caleb looked up at his father, pride filling his eyes. Marcus's calmness made everyone in the room silent. After a long pause, Marcus said, "Now, I'd like to go home. My family needs peace." The chief nodded, speechless, and escorted them out personally. Outside, a small group of reporters waited by the steps. Someone had already leaked the story. Cameras flashed as Marcus and his family walked to their car. Questions were shouted. "Mr. Hill, how do you feel about what happened? Will you press charges? Do you think justice will be served?" Marcus stopped for a moment, looked at them, and said simply, "Justice begins when we choose to do better." Then he got into the car, and they drove away. That evening, news channels everywhere carried the story. Videos recorded by neighbors had gone viral. People across the country were shocked that a man of such high position could still face such treatment. But more than that, they were moved by how Marcus reacted with dignity, not hate. Over the next few days, letters and calls poured in. Civil rights groups wanted him to file a lawsuit. Friends and colleagues urged him to make an example of the officers. But Marcus said the same thing every time. The goal is not punishment, it's change. Soon, the mayor invited Marcus to speak at a public forum on justice and equality. Danielle didn't want him to go at first. "You've done enough," she said softly. "Let it rest." But Marcus smiled and replied, "If I stay silent, it happens again to someone else's son." The night of the forum, the hall was packed. Reporters filled the aisles. The officers involved were also there, sitting quietly in the back. When Marcus took the stage, the crowd fell silent. He looked around the room and began to speak in his calm, deep voice. "Yesterday, I was a suspect. Today, I'm a symbol. But the truth is, I'm just a man who wants his son to live in a world where kindness is stronger than fear." The crowd listened closely. "I'm not here to talk about anger. I'm here to talk about lessons. The uniform should protect people, not scare them. The badge should mean safety, not power." Every word he said carried weight. People clapped softly at first, then louder as he continued. "We can't change the past," Marcus said, "but we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Every officer, every citizen, every child has a part to play." After the speech, reporters surrounded him again, but Marcus politely declined interviews. He just wanted to go home. When they reached the car, Caleb looked up and said, "Dad, everyone was listening to you. You changed their minds." Marcus smiled faintly. "Maybe, he said. But real change happens when they act differently next time. The following week, the police department officially launched a new training program focusing on community respect and racial understanding. Marcus was asked to help design it. He agreed, but only on one condition: that every officer, from the newest recruit to the oldest chief, had to attend the sessions personally. When he arrived for the first training session, the same two officers who had arrested him stood near the back of the room. They looked nervous. Marcus walked straight toward them and offered his hand. "Let's start fresh," he said. The officers hesitated, then shook his hand. That simple moment spoke louder than any speech. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked closely with the department. He shared stories, listened to officers, and created a space for honest conversation. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Officers who had once avoided eye contact with him now greeted him with respect. One evening, after a long session, Marcus walked out of the building with the chief. The chief looked at him and said quietly, "You could have destroyed us, but instead you helped us become better." "I won't forget that," Marcus replied. "That's what real justice is. It fixes, not destroys." Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal for the Hill family. The event that once brought pain was now turning into something meaningful. Marcus spent more time with his son, taking him fishing or just walking in the park. One day, while watching the sunset, Caleb asked, "Dad, how did you forgive them so easily?" Marcus smiled softly. "Because forgiveness teaches people faster than anger ever could." Later that year, the police academy invited Marcus to speak to a new group of recruits. When he walked into the auditorium, every cadet stood up in respect. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others looked inspired. Marcus stood at the podium, looked around, and began. "I've learned that real strength doesn't come from a badge, or a title, or a gun. It comes from how you treat people when no one is watching." The room was silent. He paused, letting his words sink in. "One day, each of you will be in a moment where you have a choice to act out of fear or out of understanding. I hope you choose the second." When he finished, everyone stood and applauded. The chief walked up and shook his hand firmly. "You changed this department," he said. Marcus nodded quietly and smiled. Then, maybe it was worth what happened. That night when Marcus came home, Danielle met him at the door. "How was it?" she asked. "Peaceful," he said. "They're learning." He hugged her gently. Caleb came running in, holding a newspaper with Marcus's photo on the front page. The headline read, "From Victim to Visionary, Marcus Hill teaches police the power of respect." Marcus looked at it and smiled. "That's not my story," he said. "It's ours." They sat together on the porch as the evening breeze passed through the trees. The street was quiet again, just like that afternoon before everything changed. But now, it felt different, safer, kinder, and filled with hope. Marcus looked at the stars and thought about the lesson he wanted his son to always remember. That dignity and calmness can turn even pain into purpose. And in that peaceful silence, with his family beside him, Marcus knew that sometimes the loudest way to fight injustice is through grace.